within a certain amount of time, within 8 weeks, I will have a response. Within 8 weeks, I hear, oh, well, you know, you were supposed to send this. And it's not just in this domain that it happens. Again, that is a frustration. It is a frustration that costs people their sense of trust in the process, and it's a frustration that quite simply costs people money. And so we have to have a sense of predictability on what people are expected to submit, what information is required from the applicant, and how the applicant is expected to fulfill whatever are the expectations of the Town and Country Planning Office. With respect to limitation periods, the document further suggests that consultations with referral agencies should be in accordance with existing strict timelines. So it means that if I have to go to Coastal to get their decision or to get their advice, that would be within whatever is the set timeline, so that I do not go to the applicant, or when the applicant calls, that I don't say, well, like, it is with Coastal, or it is with the Honourable Member for St. Peter, or it is with the Honourable Member for St. James South. Because applicants feel a sense of powerlessness. You cannot operate, if we agree that economic development is about the provision of choice and agency, where agency has to do with feeling a sense of power and empowerment to control your own destiny, well, you can't feel as if your destiny is forever in the hands of other people. And I speak frankly to the matter because these are the issues that confront us. And so beyond the setting of time schedules, that there should be recourse to appeal to the board if the timelines are not met. And I stand in full support, in particular, of this part of the recommendations, because I think it is important to have concrete ways in which you are holding people accountable. We may differ and we may vary and we may discuss what those timelines are, but the fact that you have to be held accountable with benchmarks for how and what you deliver is one that I fully support. And I support it beyond this to other areas of government and private sector business. Now, quite briefly, I want to move to two further matters outlined in the recommendations. One has to do with the enforcement, and the final area of the green paper on which I will focus has to do with the implementation. With respect to enforcement, the Chief Town Planner right now, under the Act, under the current Act, has considerable discretion to take action against anyone who's in breach of the planning legislation. So, in many ways, this process too lacks transparency, because the more discretionary a process is, the lower the level of transparency and accountability, because one cannot be sure on what basis a decision has been made. And so the Green Paper proposes the following. It proposes that the grounds on which an enforcement notice can be appealed to a judge in chambers should not be limited as it currently is under the Act. It further recommends, and the proposed changes to which I made reference, sir, are not exhaustive, but I am highlighting the ones that I believe the House might want to air for further discussion, and that through you, the people of Barbados will want to have brought to their attention. It further suggests that enforcement and stop notices should be prepared and served by persons with adequate training in legal requirements and procedures so that they understand the law, so that they understand the context, so that they understand their rights and their responsibilities in serving enforcement and stop notices. It recommends further that the chief town planner should keep a publicly accessible register of enforcement action, which should be available online. Now, I am one who believes in the transparency of information. Not just because it's good governance, but because it is actually good economics. It is good sense, because the truth is that if you can demonstrate that you are acting fairly, then there can be no sense that you are not. It is quite simply the sensible thing to do. And the truth is, if you are acting fairly, well, you should have nothing to hide. And so the recommendation to have a publicly accessible register of enforcement action, I think, is a sound one, because I think in particular that you want to have a sense that justice has been done. People want to be able to see that even where a decision is made against them, that they know and they understand, and that one set of rules were not applied to the member for, say, Michael West, and another set of rules applied for the member for Christchurch East Central. Because really, one of the things I believe that has frustrated Barbadians over the last 10 years, and that we have seen emerge, is the idea and the fact of two Barbadoses. That one set of rules applies to people who operate in a certain space, or have certain friends, or have certain influence and power, and another set of rules applies to people with less influence and with less economic and social power. And so, in the interest of the equal application and equal treatment of all under the law, and to be able to show by comparison that a decision taken in May 2018 in Wotton and a decision taken under similar circumstances, in a similar context, in Carrington Village in June, can be shown to be the same. It is important to be able to show that. So, sir, finally, when it comes to implementation, I come to this part because I think it is important to highlight that these kinds of processes do not happen in a vacuum, and these kinds of processes require further investment of time and resources, so that the journey that we are on is one of legislative change. And once we agree to new legislation, once we have gone through the conversation, when the new legislation is in place, there will need to be detailed policy notes and orders and regulations, and a need to establish the new governance arrangements, because I don't want us to fool ourselves that the existence of legislation equates to its enforcement or to its good practice. We need to make sure that the actors, the people who will need to provide service and to administer the new act, not only understand what they're doing, but also feel empowered to act. And just like with much of what we're doing, it requires a strong desire for change. It requires the creation of a culture for change, and it requires quite practically a set of timelines. It requires a plan for how we will get there and what we are measuring ourselves against. So we have to set targets. We have to understand that we are implementing change not just in the legislation, but also in the process that guides us. So, sir, the paper before us and my presentation this morning has not been exhaustive. I want to encourage Barbadians, and through you, I encourage Barbadians to interact with the decisions that your government is making. Because the only way that we are going to cultivate real democracy is if Barbadians participate in the ongoing processes of change. I think one of the goods that we have to be able to deliver for people is the sense that they have the space to participate. So my presentation this morning, sir, has not been exhaustive. It has not covered all of the aspects of the suggested changes for law reform, but for planning law reform. But what I sought to do was to draw out some of what I think are the very important aspects of what we're trying to do, in particular, the spirit of what we are attempting to do. The fact that we have an imperative, we have a mandate to change the investment climate in this country. We have a mandate to signal, as we have been doing, I believe, to the region, to the international community, that Barbados is ready to get back on the path to what we were becoming. I think that we have in this legislation an opportunity to put our money where our mouth is, to be able to say to Barbadians, you can trust us to deliver. I believe that it is time, and it is timely, and it is important to turn the conversation to the growth that is required, but not just to the growth that is required, but to the opportunities that exist for Barbadians to participate in that growth. And that in so doing, that they will know that the government that they elected on May 24th is supporting their goals and ambitions according to all of the powers that government has. That we do not just consider our role, our responsibility, and our place to be tax and spend, to implement revenue measures and to make spending decisions, but it is to create the environment in which activity can take place. You know, I say all the time that government does not grow, the private sector grows. And the private sector, and when I say private sector, I mean writ large. I don't just mean big business. The private sector has to lead the way for growth and development in this country. But in doing so, we have to make sure that all Barbadians are at the table and are eating. So when we talk about private sector in Barbados, I am also talking about the man who wants to get a vendor's license and who has not been able to do so for 4 years for no good reason. I am talking about the young man in Flagstaff who fixes bicycles and who wants to be able, and has the wherewithal, who wants to be able to set up a shop on the side of his house, but wants to know that once he does so within the law, he will get a timely decision so that he can support his family. And so as I close, Mr. Speaker, I want to say to Barbadians that this Barbados Labour Party government, yes, is about making sure that we accomplish recovery of our economy, because we have to. There is no basis to go forward without it. But beyond that, this Barbados Labour Party government is concerned and has put and will continue to put all of its energy into the real engines of growth in this country. The education of its people, the well-being of its people, and creating the kind of environment that people can trust and people know that once they have engaged the government of Barbados to offer assistance or to provide a service, that we take seriously that commitment and that obligation, and that we will deliver to them. And with those few words, sir, I thank you. I move, sir, that the resolution.
Honourable Mr. Michael West.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. I think, Mr. Speaker, this matter brought by the honourable member for St. Michael's South Central and so ably presented is a very important one, and it comes at a very critical time in our development as we look to cast a vision as to the potential path Barbados can take in pursuit of prosperity for the majority of our people as we go forward. But you look around this honourable House today, you would not have thought that the critical importance of this matter is to be appreciated by all, because we're discussing a green paper on planning as policy, planning policy. We look around this chamber, there is absolutely no senior minister here in this chamber to represent the interests of government and to help us to debate these matters. There's no minister here who deals with housing or lands or construction. There is no minister here who deals with agriculture or water or transportation or roads, public works. There's no minister here who deals with energy. And I really think that it is somewhat unbecoming to have an honourable member so young in this enterprise, representing the interests not only of our constituency but of the national community on this critical matter at this urgent time. And there be no presence in this chamber, Mr. Speaker, of one single senior minister on behalf of the government. I think that that is sad. But the debate must, and I'm sorry to have to say that, I really am. You may not think so, but I really am. But the debate must go on, Mr. Speaker. We cannot transform this nation either as an economy or as a society without dealing with the matter of physical development planning in a very serious way. If we transform this society, I anticipate and envisage new modes of transportation, new models of housing and housing development. I anticipate even more significant levels of impact due to the presence and the development of further technologies. The dynamic of aging is also very important in the context of our Barbados. So if we are going to actually capture those critical aspects of growth and development and really transform this nation, this society, this economy, then we have to treat to planning. And I see this green paper before us today and the consultations which have preceded this as an indication that it is clearly understood that we have to better plan and more radically plan if we are not only going to see growth and development, but transformation in our Barbadian experience. This green paper gives, in brief, a philosophical perspective on what development is about. And if I may quote from the document itself, I think it's on page 31, Mr. Speaker, says it's about the purpose of planning legislation is to provide for the orderly and progressive development of the land. The purpose of planning legislation is to provide for the orderly and progressive development of the land. And I think that that is a little narrow and therefore could be more expansively expressed. I think development must also take on board the ethical dynamics of our actions, the ethical dynamics associated with our legislative framework going forward. Development must be about the economic enterprise in which the country will engage as we seek to cause our citizens to come into greater levels of prosperity, and that the prosperity that we experience would be universally shared. But that planning must also take on board human development concerns, social development concerns, cultural development concerns. And I'm simply saying that the way the philosophical thrust or vision is expressed is narrow. Perhaps it is just the paucity of expression rather than the large richness of the vision. But development for me is more than simply an economic orientation, but it has to take on board ethical considerations, sociocultural and human development issues. I think these things must be captured in whatever frameworks we develop on the laws that we seek to put in place. Certainly the development must be balanced. I don't think Barbados can boast of having achieved balanced development. There are certain issues which are very much a part of the folklore in Barbados. There are certain developments which we have seen arise and be established, and we have had our questions on the sideline and from the distance, Mr. Speaker, as you would very well know. I'm simply trying to suggest that whatever we do going forward in terms of that vision casting for physical development planning and then the actualization of it, I'm simply trying to suggest that the concept of the balanced development must be achieved. I don't think our efforts towards that have been sufficiently successful in the past. Certainly a goal of planning for the development, physical development of a country must also aim that whatever the evidence of that development going forward, whether it has to do with specific investments, whether it has to do with social housing, whatever the evidence that presents itself after our efforts have been substantially put in place, I am seeking to say that part of the goal must be poverty reduction. And it cannot simply be development for infrastructural or aesthetic value development simply to attract investment, the byproducts of which then redound to the benefit of a narrow few or are consolidated within a certain group, but that there be poverty reduction and that the majority classes in the country who are beset by the dynamics of poverty find that there's a way forward, a way up for them, a better way of life for our people is what we seek. Mr. Speaker, I think things like shoreline or coastal development should not be politicized. We cannot, I think, honestly boast in Barbados that this has not been the case. There's a sufficient evidence, and some of it very recent, that coastline development, shoreline development has become the subject of the political intrigue that goes on in Barbados from time to time. And I don't think, there are many things I should say that would frustrate our efforts to see development, physical development of Barbados redounding in economic benefits for the majority of our people. Many things would frustrate that. One of the biggest frustrating factors, I think, is when the political element comes to the fore at the expense of every other consideration, and that happens from time to time. In the public arena, it is still very much felt by many people that a recent experience revolving around the efforts of having to do with the Hayat, for instance, this has become the subject of political intrigue, political interference, political bias. And you are a man of the street, Mr. Speaker, and I say that not in any way to detract from your honored position or your honored profession, but I know you to be very much a man of the street. You are in touch with the people. You walk on earth, and you would understand what I say when I tell you that it is very much in the bosom of the people out there that political interference sometimes gets in the way of these development projects, these physical development projects, these investment projects, and the country becomes the loser. And when it comes to shoreline and coastal development, that is especially the case. We are a tourism destination. Tourism is our number one and front burner industry, so to speak. And it's a service and a product that we export to the world, so to speak. And much of the goings-on relative to the development of our tourism product has to do with coastline and shoreline development and investment. And here is where politics comes to the table sometimes, frustrating processes, distorting the issues, and causing the country and its people ultimately to be the losers. There's the ugly story not too far behind us of the Four Seasons project. Not only are we faced with an environmental unsightly specter of what remains there, the relics of investment interests. The story is ugly. People's reputations have been sullied. Questions remain unanswered, and rumors abound. And that was considered by many to be potentially a major investment project that could have benefited the country substantially. But it's been mired not only in financial and other issues, it's been mired in political intrigue as well. Simply saying, for a small country like ours, if we're serious about planning with a strong sense of vision going forward, matters like that, we've got to leave the politics at home. Be mature enough and be big enough to understand what is in the national interest, what benefits can accrue to our efforts at development, and how are investors best to be treated in a non-political, non-partisan way at the end of the day, so that the country benefits. I think on page 51 in the same document, Mr. Speaker, addresses the issue of planning obligations. And this is important. Investors come to seek advantage. Planners of development want to seek their own advantage, often economic advantage. Countries like ours that depend upon investment, particularly external investment, foreign investment, are faced with demands from time to time that we accede to wishes that would make it easier for those who desire to invest to actually do so. And so we grant concessions. And that's our history, and there's nothing wrong with that. And it's a give and take situation. We don't give up the interests of the country, but we give in the interests of the country. We yield and we accede to certain proposals or demands, and that is fair, that is fitting, that is nothing new. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But I wonder sometimes if a sufficient emphasis is put on bringing investors to the point where they understand, look, this country needs your development. Yes, we will approve this project, yes, because it serves the country's interests and you get a return on your investment. But here's something which you can do to help this country on a pace. And if you do that and help this country on a pace, it redounds to the benefit of your endeavors and enterprise at the end of the day. Simply to illustrate, Mr. Speaker, when the Sandals people were giving all of those concessions by the last administration, I wonder, we don't know a lot about the agreement, the arrangements. At least I certainly don't, and that's part of the problem. That's another issue that has to do with development, it has to do with transparency to get to that. But I wonder what leverage was used by a government that was being asked for that level of concessions. What leverage would have been used by a government to ensure that a corporation, an entity like that, committed itself to some planning obligations that could help this country just a little bit, maybe with a small housing development issue, a road infrastructural thing, urban upgrade stuff. You know where I'm coming from, Mr. Speaker? These guys come and they get a lot. The question is, at the end of the day, are they in any way being strenuously encouraged to give a little by way of helping with our social, with our infrastructural and other development, so that these things could be attached to planning approvals. And I think the document is suggesting that this is the path ahead, and it is a path which should be more widely and openly embraced. And I support that wholeheartedly. It's affirmative action with an investor dynamic involved. Affirmative action is not only something that is undertaken by states that want to help marginalized groups or minority groups. It's an action in which investors can be involved and show their goodwill as corporate, international corporate citizens to help to develop the jurisdiction in which they are investing and out of which they will reap handsomely, as is the case, I understand, with the Sandals Corporation, if that's the right designation. We got to bear in mind, Mr. Speaker, we talk about these types of investment, whether they are on the coastline or the shoreline, or whether they are more in the interior or towards the interior, and I think was alluded to, a small space state like Barbados, there isn't much that you could refer to as being interior. We're all pretty much on the coastline, or could be impacted by dynamics operating around the shoreline or coastline. I do very well remember Mr. Speaker, when I served in the cabinet as a member of the government of the day and had some responsibility for disaster management, I was taken aback when I was told that storm surge of a certain level coming on the western or southwestern coast of Barbados could push water up into your constituency, Mr. Speaker. So we're not all very far from the shoreline. And that's push seawater up into your constituency, the Bank Hall area, that's what I was told. And that take out a lot of people and take out a lot of infrastructure. The point I am really seeking to make is that whatever the nature of the investment, whether it is a highly competitive context of the coastal area or the shoreline, or whether it is more of an interior or internal development, we have got to be very careful. It's something which I call the clash of cultures. And by that I mean clash of cultures. There's a big developer. Usually this is an external or foreign investor, and he's interested in a certain project, maybe on the coastline. But it's major investment. This is major investment. This is major capital being expended here or invested here. And sometimes that type of development causes a situation where there's a guy on the other end of the spectrum who operates a small craft for recreational activity very close to the shore. And there's a clash, there's a conflict of interest seemingly. I call it a clash of cultures. It's foreign as opposed to local, it's big as opposed to small. These are issues that we really have to deal with. And therefore, we have to make sure that whatever plans we put in place are so conceptualized that the potential negative dynamics are taken out of the mix. Politics, as I have been saying, being one of them. We can lose our investment appeal if we allow these negatives to reflect themselves in any significant fashion. I want to move on from that. I think I've said enough about that, Mr. Speaker. Now, you, Mr. Speaker, and I am sure you know quite well, represent a constituency which is quite close to Bellevue. I think, in fact, Bellevue is part of your constituency. And there are certain parts of that geography that relate to St. Michael East as well. So you are very much face-to-face with the issue of squatting. And I know sometimes, and I say this without apology, sometimes we bring an elitist attitude to this phenomenon of squatting. And we want to dismiss people who squat out of hand. And I am not in any way supporting the embrace of law-breaking efforts or practices by anybody. You shouldn't break the law, so I don't want to be accused of encouraging people to break the law and squat where they shouldn't and do this. I'm not saying that. All I'm saying is that the phenomenon of squatting with which you are familiar, I grew up in Station Hill, just across the pasture. You know the pasture, which used to be a pasture. That's another issue, Mr. Speaker. You got to do something about that, Your Honor. It used to be a pasture, almost totally destroyed by the passage of vehicles, by some elements of squatting, and other misuse of the place. That was my backyard. You have to do something about that, Mr. Speaker. And all I'm saying here is the instinct to squatting is born of a certain need and a certain demand. It is need for housing, it's a need for shelter, it's a need for access to land. And I don't just think it's an instinct to lawlessness. And like I said, I'm not encouraging anybody to go squat. I'm simply saying that we cannot from year to year, from year after year, year after year, look at what is happening up in the Bellevue area and other parts of Barbados, where there's some level of degradation existing among those who must occupy those circumstances. We can't just look at it year after year after year and do nothing about it. Squatting is born of a certain need. Squatting is born of a certain demand. Squatting is born of a certain class dynamic in Barbados. The essence of what I'm trying to say, Mr. Speaker, is that physical development planning has to take on board class dynamics. Class dynamics. And it cannot take on board class dynamics in a one-sided way, where we provide comfortably for those who have the wherewithal, for those who sometimes can buy their way around, and we neglect the interests of those at the other end of the scale who have no access to land, who have little capacity to afford housing, and by circumstances then become driven to do the thing we would prefer them not to do. We end up with the Bellevues, Gemswick, of this world. And that is a very serious thing. So we cannot dismiss the class dynamic as we conceptualize these policies. The issue of the restrictions on land use because of the presence of what we call water zones has been a real bugbear in Barbados. Certainly by now, engineering skills have reached a stage, and our capacity as a people perhaps has been arrived at to such an extent that we can start to incorporate into our planning the engineering responses to the issue of restrictions on land access caused by water zone areas in a context where we're a small size. We are a lot of people, one of the most densely populated places in the world, certainly in the region. And we've got to use the limited space available to us. And whereas we have to protect our water resources from contamination of all sorts, and including those caused by human agency, we must bring to bear the engineering responses that can be brought to bear to address land scarcity in that particular regard. Now, Mr. Speaker, transparency-related issues are important. The Honourable Member, St. Michael South Central, dealt with that as well. The Green Paper addresses that, understandably so. Part of the problem we've had historically in Barbados when it comes to town country issues and physical development matters has been questions related to transparency of the processes and of the decisions and revolving around the decisions which have been made. I believe, as I see seemingly intimated here in the document, the Green Paper, that the potential for corruption is understood to be associated with the adoption of the ministerial model. You want to take, potentially, public figures out of harm's way. You want to reduce temptation. We want to eliminate it if possible. And we want to make sure that a level of integrity obtains among those who lead us. And that is pretty high on the agenda of the nation these days. And therefore, anything which potentially offers easy opportunity for corrupt practices either by public officials or those seeking the favor of public officials we need to treat to. And I think the efforts outlined in this document address that matter. In Barbados, there has long been a low confidence threshold relative to the matter of planning approvals. And I don't have evidence which you might have, Mr. Speaker, that misdeeds are perpetrated by any public official, but I know that Bajans feel that they don't have, that you cannot place fully your confidence in these processes. And that I don't think is news. That is not the news of the day. That has been the case. I think if we read, and I tried last night to read this document carefully, it is suggesting that the potential to corruption must be addressed as we frame laws for physical development planning, especially as it relates to those who have to review applications, the process involved in arriving at decisions, and the interaction between the public and the public officials. And whatever the folklore suggests, whatever the rumor mill shows up, and whatever the evidence confirms, we have to go forward with this in view, that if we're going to do this properly, we have to build in the mechanisms to counter potential corruption in the process. I agree with the expressed intention, perhaps the consideration, to have a sustainable development board. As I understand it, you want to take partisan individuality and, to some extent, ministerial purview and discretion out of the matter and immerse it in a framework which more substantially would evoke the confidence of the public in the processes which are ongoing around planning and planning approvals. Sustainable Development Board, because it's intended to some extent to be non-political, to be transparent, to be an anti-corruption mechanism, and to allow us to achieve greater efficiencies in management and in the delivery of services. And I don't think anybody would want to argue against that. There's also the consideration of having an appeals tribunal to review the decisions of the Town and Country Planning Department, as opposed to leaving that responsibility solely in the hands and the powers of a minister. And who would want to argue with that, Mr. Speaker? You sit in the chair comfortably, so you're not faced with that type of temptation. But your colleagues do not want to be faced with that type of temptation. And we do not want to set up, as we go forward, a situation where purveyors of criminal evil would want to corrupt your erstwhile colleagues. And I support you in that sentiment wholeheartedly. And of course, access to information. If you're going to be transparent, people have to be more involved in the process. Use the technology of the day to allow for better access. Allow for citizen participation in some of the processes of planning. And bring professional people who are not necessarily connected with the state agency immediately and directly into the process, and let them bring their expertise to assist in helping us to frame and fashion the frameworks, but also to actually give actualization to the processes. So transparency and very important, and I support the major stipulations or provisions in considerations in the Green Paper that will help us to get there. Now, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to speak a little bit about what I call legacy-related issues. I'm going to refer to this document with your leave, Mr. Speaker. With your leave, Mr. Speaker. This is the report of the National Commission on Law and Order, Draft Plan on Justice, Peace, Security, June 2004. And I think this is already a document of this House. I want to make the point that planning must consider cultural values. Planning laws and planning regulations must consider cultural values. Cannot be divorced from our cultural mores and our cultural values and our cultural context. And I think the honorable member, Sir Michael South Central, alluded to that briefly. But that matter was addressed in this report of the Law and Order Commission in 2004, a document of which I'm sure you are fully seized, being a practitioner in the courts of Barbados, and one highly acclaimed with respect to the practice of law, and well saluted. On page 67, I just quote a few lines. Talking about the increase in new housing developments, that's the section. Many of these developments resulted in districts where houses have been built as dormitories, but in which communities have neither grown nor developed. He's talking about the absence of community in Barbados today. The spirit and social responsibility which generally typified the village are all but non-existent in these districts. To support the concept of islands within an island is to provide legitimacy for the notions of us and them, so frequently repeated by young voices today. Building communities which are so exclusive that they are entirely separated by physical structures has the dangerous potential of alienating some segments of the population. So that is the issue of alienation, Mr. Speaker. And I really want to suggest that if we haven't done it, that Barbados needs, as it considers new policies for physical development planning, to study the impact of closed communities. Some people call them gated communities. I want to say closed communities, because at the end of the day, a gate is just a gate. It's more closed communities in the context of a small state or small space. That Law and Order Commission, Mr. Speaker, recommended that government reassess the role and responsibility of the Town and Country Planning Department, recognizing the impact of physical development on social matters. Government, before granting approval, should carefully consider the desirability of establishing gated communities and conduct thorough studies on their impact in other Caribbean countries. Developers of all new residential estates should be mandated to provide and maintain adequate common social and recreational facilities to be shared by residents. Government should seek to ensure that adequate physical development plans are drafted and implemented to improve the living and social conditions in the areas sometimes described as ghettos or slums. And the point being made, Mr. Speaker, and I hope fairly clearly, is that we need to study formally the impact of closed communities in the context of a small state. and that planning pressure should be put on those who develop housing to ensure that the socio-cultural dynamics of Barbadian life are taken into consideration. After all, Mr. Speaker, at the end of the day, we live in Barbados, in the Caribbean region, and in not some impersonal developed country context. We want to know each other while at the same time accommodating each other's privacy, and the right balance must be found. I know that the government is considering or has plans, and I hope that the economic situation now confronting us does not too far push back those plans. But I'm referring to the government's desire. Sound like I'm speaking for the government. I'm referring to the government's desire to redress or address the matter of intergenerational overcrowding in some of the the early housing development schemes in Barbados. And I remember hearing reference to a program for the pine, because you got 2 and 3 generations living in small housing units built in the 50s and 60s, which do not at all properly accommodate the life habits of 2018 going forward. But generations in an overcrowded small housing space context with all that portends. And I believe that in going forward planning, need to look at that. If government is in a position to so do by itself or in partnership somehow, partnership arrangements with the private sector to develop the more modern government housing settlements that we see, that is fine. But even as we do that, we still have to remember that there's a pine, there's a grisettes, there is a Bailan, and these housing situations still exist from 50s and 60s, and 2 and 3 generations occupy small spaces where our habits of life have changed largely in the last 4, 5, 6 decades. I believe, Mr. Speaker, the document also addresses at page 46 the matter of, that is the document, the green paper, the matter of protection, heritage protection legislation. This is another thing of great importance, of extremely great importance. On page 45, if I may quote from this document, Barbados has a wealth of heritage assets which provides a very valuable heritage tourism product. However, much of the built heritage is in poor condition and at risk of loss. The existing legislation is weak and very limited, and penalties for non-compliance are so low that they provide no deterrent whatsoever. The designation of UNESCO World Heritage status for Bridgetown and its historic garrison recognizes the importance of this key asset, but does not provide the protection or tools to maximize its potential. So the protection of heritage assets, that which is built, that which is more organic, if I might express it like that, Mr. Speaker, is very important, and I am sure the policy paper gives clear indication that this is also to be addressed. On that matter of UNESCO, the UNESCO designation of Bridgetown as a World Heritage site, Mr. Speaker, I know you walk on earth, as I said. So you walk the streets not only of Bridgetown, Broad Street, Swan Street, but you go through the alleys. I know you very well, Mr. Speaker, and this does not take away from your honored position. I go through the alleys too, And you know, Mr. Speaker, it is worse now than it has ever been in the past. No, it is obnoxious. It is abhorrent. The smell. You guys need to walk the alleys of Bridgetown. I know you do, honorable member from St. Thomas. I am speaking to people like the honorable member St. John and St. George South. They're looking at me as though they did not know that there were alleys in Bridgetown.
I walked 7 hours.
That is out of Bridgetown. I'm talking about in Bridgetown. You need to walk the alleys of Bridgetown, and the absence of toilet facilities, I suppose, prompts people, especially people who have some ailment, especially people who are beset a bit by problems associated with age. And it is worse now, Mr. Speaker, than it was before. All I'm saying simply is that that is an issue. How can you claim you're a World Heritage Site? Not much has been done by the last administration to take advantage of that designation. And I have every confidence. I have every confidence in the honorable member of St. Philip West and the Minister of Culture and whichever other minister will hold his hand to help him with these matters, that these matters will be addressed. UNESCO designation is a very important thing. We should be using that somehow to ensure that there is a greater level of tourist appeal based on that or related to that. But quite apart from that, coming home, I'm down in the alleys, Mr. Speaker, as you are from time to time, and it is rank down there. It is bad. And I do not understand how in 2018 you still have a situation where you have to go into some places, business places in Broad Street that are making a lot of money, that post large and high numbers with respect to profits, that are bringing new charges and putting them upon us every day, and yet they would not provide a bathroom facility for their customers and clients. In 2018, I am to ask what pressure is being put. Hey, it cannot be beyond a bank in Broad Street or wherever else. Irrespective of how the building is now logistically profiled, to build on a bathroom to which the public can have access. Sorry? It's covered in the health and safety at work. And we are not enforcing that, you were saying.
Go crosstalk, please. Address the chamber, please.
Yeah, but I don't know what laws exist, Mr. Speaker, but whatever they are, if they do exist, they have to be enforced. I have seen with my own eyes an elderly person suffer stress and embarrassment because of that. I don't want to bring it down to that small and individual unit level, but Bridgetown is a World Heritage Site. And the celebrated Calypso said what, Mr. Speaker? No toilets in town. No toilet. I don't know who sang it. Mr. Honorable Member St. Philip West will be able to tell me better who sang it, but I know it's in Trinidad. All over town, no toilets. So, Mr. Speaker, the broader point is legislation to better protect our heritage sites, the built and organic, so to speak, heritage. There's a concept. There's something called empty property legislation. And we have this issue in Barbados, all over Barbados. And some attempts have been made to deal with the problem, but the problem persists. It's not going away. It's not diminished by any significant extent. Vacant properties, unused properties, some of them ownership in dispute, some of it ownership non-existent, but they're there. They're there. And we have people struggling for land. We have people struggling for access to housing. And all these vacant properties exist. They're posing all kinds of threats, health threats, social behavioral threats. They're presenting opportunities for crime and other misdeeds. And it must be in the capacity of government to negotiate ownership of some of these vacant properties so that we may treat to the dynamics relative to the aesthetics, the environment. It must be that we can bring enforcement to bear to a greater extent than we now do. In circumstances like this, where these properties exist in growing numbers at a time when people are struggling and government is challenged to find the capacity to help to transfer land and to give people access, people at the bottom, access to housing. Some instances, higher taxes are used and applied to these vacant lots. So you have a vacant lot and it's not being used, you pay a higher level of taxation. It's a penalty. It's an incentive, if you want to call it that, to put that property into positive use and to help us to deal with the negatives associated with that. Mr. Speaker, I realize that so many others do, I'm sure you do too, that this problem is now a problem more immediately attaching itself to government, because more and more we are seeing properties formerly used by government for public service delivery being abandoned. They're barricaded, they're abandoned, they stay there for years, some of them large. There's this one not too far from us over here, the old National Insurance building. Some of them smaller, the training division building in the Pine there. The Louis Lynch School has been sitting there for years. These are abandoned properties. Whatever the cause of the abandonment, they sit there. They are empty properties. And I believe that some serious study and effort must be made and done to see if some proper use, effective use can be made of these properties. They're community groups. I had a man one time he said to me more than once, you see that building there in the Pine, you know what I could do with that? And he's talking about community-related programs. He ain't talking about making any money. There's no business enterprise, just to serve the community. You know what I could do with that? But it sits there, and it will sit there, and it will decay, and it will rot. We need to come to a national consensus as to what we want to do, Mr. Speaker, with respect to these high buildings. The Hyatt was a case that presented itself. The issue, we understand, had more so to do with environmental impact assessment, but there were questions about the proposed height of the building in the coastal area and in the city area. And I do not know that if we've arrived at a common understanding as to what we want to do with development that takes us up. As a layman, I would suggest that since we are short of land space and overpopulated, we need to make more use of the space going up. Rather, that's also a spatial dimension, rather than simply concentrate on going out. Up is a spatial dimension. But we have to have a consensus as to with what do we want to go up? Where do we want to go up? And how high do we want to go? I do not know if we fully ventilated that issue as a country. Mr. Speaker, I note the time, and I will be here for a little while. And would you want to break for lunch?
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move suspension of this morning's sitting until 2:30 this afternoon.
Question is that this chamber be now suspended until 2:30 in the afternoon. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, please say no. This honorable chamber is now suspended until 2:30 p.m. was debating
for you. You want to recommit to government notices first. Government.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I beg to give notice of the following bills. The National Insurance and Social Security Amendment and Validation Bill 2018 and the Local Loans Amendment Bill 2018.
No, you don't need a second. Not for notice, not for notice.
Okay.
Then leave to withdraw.
To withdraw. Consequently, Mr. Speaker, I rise to have leave to withdraw the following bills at 6 and 7 of today's order paper. The National Insurance and Social Security Amendment Bill 2018 and the Local Loans Amendment Bill 2018, and to replace those bills with the two aforementioned bills.
You can second that one, sir.
Wait to second that, sir.
Yeah, withdraw. Do the motion. Yeah, you put a motion. Yeah. The question is that these bills be withdrawn. The question is that these bills be withdrawn.
The question is that the aforementioned bills be withdrawn. Those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. The aforementioned bills are thereby withdrawn.
Mr. Speaker, recommittal of first readings of bills. Minister Strong.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the first reading of the National Insurance and Social Security Amendment and Validation Bill 2018.
Question is that the said bill be read for a first time. Those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Between the ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the first reading of the Local Loans Amendment Bill 2018.
Question is that the aforementioned bill be read the first time. Those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Between the ayes have it.
Revert to government business, sir.
Honorable Chairman, now reverse to government business.
Any suspension.
Do you want to remember for St. Michael West?
In relation broadly to what I call legacy-related issues, we need to treat to the problem of unoccupied dwellings over a long time, what we call empty properties, and see if we can be more effectively positioned to bring these properties into proper use using either some means of enforcement or some negotiation process that would allow us to come to a settlement with established owners as to how properties may be in effect brought back into use. I was also saying that I think need to develop to a greater extent the consensus around the issue of high buildings, high-rise buildings, the height to which we want to go, what types of buildings, where in terms of the location, the use to which these buildings are put, etc., etc. I think that this is very consequential, especially you're dealing with coastal properties. You are dealing with the ecosystem impact, the environment impact on your coastline. When you talk about high buildings, you're talking about emergency access to those who might need them in the event of such. And then there's something called the psychology of small spaces and how that impacts upon people. Barbados is a small space society. It's an island situation. High-rise buildings in inappropriate places or blocking access of view to the coastline and beyond could become quite a problem but that has to do with the psychology of human behavior in small spaces. The green paper, Mr. Speaker, speaks at page 43 to the matter of environmental impact assessments, and the honorable member who made the presentation, St. Michael South Central, alluded to this as well in some detail. I just want to focus on that. I think it's extremely important. Recent history made this very much a matter of controversy here in Barbados and impacted upon investment prospects, etc., and occasioned some much political debate. On page 43 of the document, if I may quote just a bit, it has become the practice of the town country planning to require EIAs to be submitted by applicants in some instances. Some guidance with respect to the cases in which EIAs are required by the town country planning department. Terms of reference for EIA studies and EIA process included public participation requirements are contained in the physical development plan amended 2003, approved by this Parliament, and in the applicant's handbook and guide to town planning published by the town country planning department. It is out of print, not available, according to this parenthesis here. However, the document goes on to say, these publications are both policy documents, and to date, a firm legal framework for the EIA process is lacking. In this respect, as documented in a recent study of the legislative framework for EIA in the Caribbean carried out by the Caribbean Law Institute under the Impact Justice Project, Barbados is lagging behind other Commonwealth Caribbean countries with respect to this matter. So I just want to support the position intimated in the document that this is an area that would have to be covered by any proper legislative planning going forward on the matter. I'm not going to quote any further on that because it basically furthers the point already made. Another related matter is the role of the Coastal Zone Management Unit, which has some degree of oversight for physical development planning as you come to the coastline. Naturally, my understanding of the policy document here, the green paper here, is that there may be some lack of complementarity or clarity of roles with respect to the function of the Coastal Zone Management Unit and the Department of Town Country Planning, because some aspects of approval do fall under the purview, or at least must be brought to the consultative eye of the Coastal Zone Management Unit in terms of arriving at decisions on planning approval. So we therefore need to iron out the bureaucratic and legislative disharmony apparently existing to some extent. Very quickly, Mr. Speaker, if I might suggest further, I don't know how much attention is paid to matters like capacity studies with reference to the carrying capacity of Barbados. We want all the tourists in the world to come. We wish they would and bring all their wherewithal and spend all that they have here before they leave. But in matters of planning, the whole issue of carrying capacity of a small island state is very pertinent, and I think we need to be better assured that more studies are formally done with respect to the carrying capacity of Barbados. On page, section 11 of this UN document on emerging issues for small island developing states, this point is broached, Mr. Speaker. Most small island developing states are characterized, of course, by limited land resources, which are under increasing demands and intense pressure from multiple and competing uses, as well as from climate change and extreme events. An emerging concern is that these cumulative pressures may lead to the land carrying capacity being exceeded. That's the point. Land, as you know, is closely linked to fresh water, and there may be tipping points where the degradation of both resources rapidly accelerates, threatening islands' habitability. To avoid this, small island developing states need to judicially use their available land resources and ensure proper physical planning and land use management based on estimates of human carrying capacity and embrace more sustainable consumption and production patterns. So development cannot really be unchecked. We would love to benefit to the fullest extent possible from those who invest their time of presence and their resources here when they come, but we've got to be very careful that we do not exceed our capacity so to carry and then imperil the rest of the experience for both for them and for us. Issues of energy, of course, issues of water, and all types of things come into the mix. Another very important area broached by this particular document, same document, Mr. Speaker, is the business of use of pesticides, and usually related to agricultural processes or enterprises or undertakings. And we got to guard against the indiscriminate increasing use of pesticides again. Small island developing states import many pesticides, among which are persistent organic pesticides. Their indiscriminate and increasing use is endangering human health, fragile island ecosystems and biodiversity, as well as agricultural production and contaminating freshwater sources. The call, therefore, is for a stricter regime or regimes for the management of the use of pesticides, etc., etc. The threats to our coral formations on our coastline, these threats are real. Some of them are human-induced, others are caused by human activities, other related activities of enterprise, and therefore our coral formations on our coastline are a strong asset for us in terms of our marine environment and the tourism product as it relates to marine life and the marine economy. And we would want to make sure that our planning sufficiently captures this interest such that this particular asset and resource is not further degraded, as it already is, by the rising temperatures of water, of the water around us.
Even as the Honourable Leader of the Opposition exits the chamber, I would want, though, to say to not just the chamber, but I think it's important to say to the country that this green paper on planning law reform, and that is the reason why I sound as though I take exception to the statement I heard earlier, and I sound that way because I do. This green paper on planning law reform is one that has had and generated discussion within the parliamentary party of this Barbados Labour Party government. This is not a document that we are coming here to talk about for the first time. We have been discussing this. We've come to talk about it for the first time in the chamber, but we've discussed it, we've distilled it. As a matter of fact, in our manifesto at page 52, we, including the Leader of the Opposition, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition, we at page 52 indicated to Barbados in a document that the Barbados Labour Party has traditionally understood to be its contract with the people. And we said at page 52 that we'll convene within a month a special group to look at town planning reform. And I'm happy, Mr. Speaker, that after just 4.5 months, we are able to commence the debate. The result of the work done by what the manifesto calls a special purpose mission team. And we have now before this honourable chamber and before the public of Barbados a document well written, well prepared, and one that is available now, because I heard the leader of the opposition talk about a policy document. Well, he has been here for long enough to know that a green paper is not the policy document. I just come. I know the white paper is the policy document, which will follow this. This is the document for discussion, and it is available to the public. We are starting the discussion in this honorable chamber, but the Barbados Labour Party, as it keeps its commitment to the people that elected it, has brought to this honorable chamber this document, this green paper on planning law reform. And in that vein, I would want to encourage members of the public to avail themselves of the document, look through it, and make their comments. Because this Barbados Labour Party is a party that believes in engaging with the people, speaking with people, listening to people, and responding to the concerns of people. The existing act we would have heard this morning is an old piece of legislation. 1965 is my understanding, tinkered with along the way. Mr. Speaker, through you to the chamber and to the country, a 1965 act in 2018 needs some kind of adjustment. The act, the foundation of the old act, came into play even before our independence. And so we are at the point, after having experienced the last decade, to change the framework and to put into place a piece of legislation which will eventually come that will manage the process of developing this country of ours. And that is the important matter that we are considering today. We need to upgrade the framework within which we manage our own development. Now, that is just a reality. Times change. And as times change, as societies evolve, population centers shift, we have to relook the process of developing the country and ensuring that the development of the country is done in a regulated way, is done in a manner that is sustainable and makes sense in terms of improving the lot and the lives and the circumstances of the people of the country. And so statutes, regulations, laws, however we refer to them, have to keep pace with the development of the country and the changing of the times. We live in what has now become maybe cliche, a globalized world. We hear it all the time. But Mr. Speaker, I think it is important to point out that the globalization of the world means that we are impacted in ways now and will be impacted in ways in the future that we've not been impacted in the past. As a small island developing state, as environmentalists would say, as a small open economy, as economists would say, foreign direct investment, or the investing in our country by people who may not be Barbadians, is very important. Because as we seek to develop our country, we understand, we realize, we recognize that we do not have all the resources needed for the development of our country. The people of the country, the people of St. Michael Central, the people of St. Peter, want to have increasingly better lives. And so when we cannot have indigenous investment in that development, we will need investment from outside of our country. The increasingly globalized nature of things, of the world and the practice of development means that investment is very portable. An investor can decide to put his money in Barbados or St. Lucia or Greece or Singapore. It doesn't really matter where, because investment vehicles are very, very portable. It means, therefore, that if a small island developing state, a small open economy like Barbados, is to be able to attract investment, then there must be a certain ease of doing business. Another term that is bandied around, but a term that simply speaks to removing unnecessary impediments, unnecessary hindrances to the facilitation of business in an economy. And so when we talk about the ease of doing business and improving the ease of doing business, we're not talking about allowing bandits, if that is a term I could use, or let me just say unsavory characters. We're not talking about allowing people who may be termed using those words to come into the country and do as they like. We are talking about facilitating serious business people who have a certain level of ethics and decency, but who would prefer to invest in a country where it did not seem as though they had to be constantly jumping through unnecessary hoops in order to be able to open a business, to open a bank account, to start to hire people, and to start to generate income, develop their business, and by extension, develop this country. The world demands that we become facilitators of decent investment and not hindrances to that investment. Barbados is 431 square kilometers. And I use, because Barbados has adopted the metric system, we still like to talk about square miles. But we're a small island. And in a small island, as we build it out, as we develop it, we have to make decisions as to what kind of Barbados we want for ourselves, but also what kind of Barbados we want for succeeding generations. We have limited landmass, and we're also scarce in resources. And so even as the Honourable Member, Leader of the Opposition Member for St. Michael West, who is still my friend, he spoke to the idea of vertical space. And I agree with him. One of the issues we have to deal with is how we use our space. And so whether it is space terrestrial, lateral on land, whether it is vertical space, or whether it is the space in the ocean that surrounds us, we have to make decisions as to the use of the space that the country possesses. And so we need to have the appropriate legislative framework that will allow us to properly build out, properly use the space that we have around us. High-rise buildings, do we need them? If we do, how high? All those are questions that need to be asked. Offshore islands, do we need them? If so, where? What is going to be the framework? As the Honourable Member, the Leader for the Opposition, was speaking to closed communities. How closed? How open? These are all questions that need to be asked. And they need to be asked in a logical way. There needs to be a structure in place to provide answers that will be conducive to the development and the proper development of the country. Now, I want to focus on two specific considerations that I consider important as we speak about building out a country, building out our country. And the first is environmental. The world we live in, Mr. Speaker, seems to be revolting against the mistreatment of it by human beings. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition would be familiar with the term, the earth is groaning. And I think we see evidence of it. And the earth is groaning because we have impacted our earth in a way that makes our very existence unsustainable. And those kinds of developments take place because the development is done outside of a framework that speaks to sustainability. And so we find ourselves as a world playing catch up. Barbados has taken this step that we will push the process of determining how to develop this country in a sustainable way. We and our Prime Minister, the Honourable Leader of this party, member for St. Michael North East, was very, very eloquent at the UN recently. We are fighting now not just for shorelines, we are fighting for life. And so as a country, we intend to move away from the playing catch-up, and we intend to put a framework in place that will allow us to sustainably develop our country for ourselves, our children, and those who we invite to visit our shores. And through that, to contribute in some small or large way to the sustainable development of this entire globe. That is our contribution to the development of our country and our world. The other area, beside environmental, that I would want to speak to just briefly is the matter of heritage. The Green Paper at from page 45 speaks to built heritage, conservation of built heritage. And Mr. Speaker, one of the reasons why I am a strong believer in heritage is because I represent a constituency that I consider to be the heritage capital of Barbados. And I'm not going to use any terms like, with all due respect to historic British, because I believe that Speightstown is the heritage capital, our first commercial center, our first port, the center of the trade in sugar, the epicenter. I like that term, member for Christchurch, West Central. But having that status, as where really all started for Barbados, there's a lot of heritage assets, heritage buildings in Speightstown that need to be protected. And the Green Paper on planning reform speaks to how we deal with demolition of buildings, alteration of buildings, and it speaks quite specifically to the fact that while we have a physical development plan, there is not the legislative framework in place to give good effect to the provisions of the physical development plan. And so if we do not have that legislative framework in place, the physical development plan document becomes almost a waste of the hundreds of pages of paper that it is often printed on. And so we have to create that framework that allows for heritage assets like Speightstown to be properly protected as part of the patrimony of this country. We have to protect our assets, our heritage assets, and we have to do it using all the tools that are available to us. And in that regard, I would want maybe parenthetically to say publicly that some years ago, the cannon, well, I should back up to say that Spikestown was the most fortified place in Barbados in the 1600s. And some years ago, our cannon were taken away from Spikestown. We were told that they were taken for safekeeping. I am serving notice that we will be coming back for them as we build out Spikestown, following our manifesto pledge of creating in Spikestown the hub for heritage, the arts, and cuisine. We will be coming back for our cannon. There are a number of issues that need to be addressed even as we craft new legislation. As I said, this green paper is for discussion. A white paper will follow, which will be policy, and that white paper will be crafted only after the people of this country and the institutions have been engaged in discussions on this white paper. But as we craft the white paper, the policy, and then any subsequent legislation, there are, as I referred to before, issues that need to be dealt with. We spoke about height of buildings. There are things like setbacks for the high water mark. And in Spikestown, as we speak, I have a whole set of documents here with me. I'm not going to make them a document of documents of the House because I'm not going to quote from them. But there are issues where there is no more beach, where government has created a boardwalk, whereby the delineation of the boundaries of the boardwalk, government has indicated what is now public area. But there are still business places that are being told that there needs to be this setback. And we wonder, as the course moves, if at some point the setback becomes the middle of the street, in Orange Street. And I'm saying, Mr. Speaker, that as we develop the policy and develop the legislation coming out of the policy, that these are some of the issues that will need to be addressed. The matter of the limited staff in the town planning area in the Prime Minister's office, that is a matter that needs to be addressed. And it is, I'm not happy that some of that complication is based on a High Court ruling coming out of a case originating in St. Peter. That I'm not proud of, and it was a decision, a former town planner, it spoke to matter of change of use of land at 6 Mains. I also want, again, parenthetically, to say that the issue of land in 6 Mains is one, and I've said in this chamber, I think maybe twice before, it is a matter that has to be resolved. And I'm saying it again in the context of the consideration of this green paper, because there are issues like those that affect people's lives. Whenever I'm in 6 Mains, whenever I'm in St. Peter, whenever I think about 6 Mains, I wonder how it would be to go to sleep at night not being sure of your tenure. Having lived on the land for 40 or 50 years, knowing that your parents and grandparents also lived on the land, but not having title to the land, not through any issue that you created, but because in 1976 or 1975 you were told to stop paying rent, and now you have difficulty in being able to repair, renovate your home because there is no tenure. We have people in 6 Mains, Mr. Speaker, who are unable to get water connections from the Barbados Water Authority because they cannot establish the ownership of the land. And I'm saying to this chamber, and I'm saying to the honorable member for Christchurch East, that in a 2018 Barbados, we're going to have to sort it out, because nobody should be living in Barbados in a place where they've lived for generations and not be able to have running water. But as I said, that was parenthetic. I wanted to make that point because we're talking about land use, and that will involve land ownership, how we deal with developing, how we deal with change of use. Matters like those will have full ventilation, will have the framework within which to be resolved once we move from the green paper to the white paper to settled law. We've had challenges with town planning and the town planning process for many years. Many years ago, I used to be president of the Barbados Hotel and Tourism Association, and we had actually had to set up meetings, monthly meetings, or bi-monthly meetings, I think, with the town planning department, because it had become a serious frustration. How do we get from application to approval in less than 4 or 5 years? How do we understand quickly what the issues are? What does the developer need to bring back in terms of information? How can we get to permission stage without having to wait 4 years and 5 years? And in some cases, there are people who would have had financing lined up. But because the process was taking so long, those financial backers will recognize that money has a cost, and if I'm not able to earn it investing here, then I have to make a decision to say, well, forget about that and invest over here. And so as a country that is pinning its hopes, its future on growth, even as we face the sad reality of having to displace and to send home some of our valued public servants, as a country that is seeking in the shortest possible time to have all of those persons re-engaged, not just to earn a living for themselves and their families, even though that is vitally important, but to develop the country as a whole. As we move toward that, we have to make sure that there is growth in the economy, that there is investment in the economy, and that the potential for investment and growth is not frustrated because of archaic laws and rules and regulations. And so, Mr. Speaker, this discussion, this debate today is vitally important, not just for the country as a whole, but it is vitally important for every person who may be losing their jobs. We have to make sure that those persons can be re-employed in the shortest possible time. That means there must be investment, and we must create the forum and the structure where that investment can take place, decent investment in the shortest possible time.
Honorable has 2 more minutes.
Wow. I want to speak quickly to the matter of, it was raised before, I think, by the honorable member for St. Michael South Central, the whole matter of planning obligations. And I want to just mention, since I can't develop the point, 2 that relate to St. Peter. And this is the model that this government will be using. When Sandals completes the resort at Beaches, there will be, and we will be holding them to this, parking for the public and also washrooms and bathroom facilities for the public. Now, there was car parking before, But planning obligations or planning gains means that as investors develop their businesses, there is some benefit for the surrounding communities. This green paper speaks to that, and I highly commend it to this honorable chamber. There's also planned development at Fort Denmark. That also will include, as with the Haywood site, full access to the complete beach. It will include parking for the public, and it will include bathroom facilities for the public. And this is where we need to go, because in Barbados now we have some public accesses to beach, but those public accesses assume that the only people going to the beach are the people who live close by, and that they're going to be walking 3 and 4 feet wide. This green paper speaks to planning gains, planning obligations, and we, as we develop our country, will be ensuring that those who invest in the country with the aim of earning on their investment are also investing in the surrounding communities.
Honourable member, you need to wind up.
I will wind up. And so, Mr. Speaker, this green paper speaks to good governance. It speaks to consultation. It speaks to engaging our citizens and stakeholders through that consultative process. And it speaks to those things because it is the Barbados Labour Party way. That is how we govern. That is how we manage the country. The green paper that will allow for that broad input by the citizenry and by other stakeholders is part of our DNA. It is how we govern. And so I will close by saying we have gone past the shady decisions. For investment to come, roles need to be clear. There need to be set timelines. There needs to be certainty. All these matters and other matters will be addressed as we discuss this green paper, as we, having taken the input of our citizens and other stakeholders on board, go through the process of developing the white paper, settle the government policy, and as we move from there to enact legislation to give life to this reform, we will be doing it, and the country can be assured that gone are the days where nobody knew what was happening, where shady things could happen. We are through this and in other enactments ensuring that good governance returns to this country. And so, Mr. Speaker, I want to commend this green paper on planning law reform to this honorable chamber. I want to commend it to the country, and I want to say to the people of Barbados to get engaged, stay engaged, and help us to move the development of this country forward so that all of us can benefit and improve our status in life and our standard of living. Mr. Speaker, I'm obliged to you.
Honourable member for St. Michael's.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to relegate your standing. I don't have that status in these honorable chambers. And certainly if I had it, it would be elevation for sure. Sir, I've heard a lot of discussion about reform. The paper speaks about reform. I've heard some misrepresentation about what represents development. There's no fixed, universal description of what development is. Economists bandied these views around and believe that they have the autonomy to determine what development is. Sociologists also has a wider view of what constitutes development. There's also what I describe as the pollution of the mind through education. That keep human beings in a fixed position, that development is about the adoption, although they don't say that, about the constructs of the metropolitan world, and try to recreate a micro image of what the metropolitan world indicates that development is. And in these papers of what is called scientific study, there's a very limited revelation or expression of the development of the very indigenous people in which the country that talk so much and brag so much about development, there's nothing mirrored in the definition or in the context of the document that speaks in any meaningful way about development. The only thing you see is heritage. It is so unfortunate. And we are all victims of believing that this is the only model that exists for development. So everybody speaks about the property class. Everybody speaks about high-rise buildings. Everybody speaks about the neo-plantocrats and the neo-barons in the system of merchants. Everybody wants to protect a house at Lears as heritage. They want to preserve the building at Buckley. They want all the houses, the houses in the Bell. They want Abowitz Plantation House. Nobody makes any serious mention of the majority class in the society. But this is supposed to be not a humble radical transformation, physical transformation in the society. This is not to perpetuate the memories of the faces that we witness within focus in this House Assembly. This is to perpetuate the memories of people who suppress and oppress them, that every time we look at these images, we remember the horrors of the most barbaric period in our history. Development is about the metrics, the ecology of a people. I will never be satisfied with any plan that exclude even the charter houses, the importance of the preserves of the heritage from the class. You know, they don't like me to talk about race here. I got to find a new word for the ethnic type of which I belong. Everybody will accept that. Somebody will run around and go to the newspaper and get some little political minion to reproduce an article, and while I am trying to the representative of St. Michael's East is just representing the type of people that I grew up with, the home that I came up in, and the interests of these people, some little minion on the radio, sometimes on the television station or in the newspaper will be babbling nonsensical views about my assessment of what they might call an important document. I am not critical because people are victims of a mindset, and sometimes they're not even conscious that they're doing things that will wipe them from the history of civilization. They just do these things subconsciously. And although some people might appear to be very passionately involved in this exercise, I also know that sometimes theatrics are more dominant than genuine passionate views over the importance of reform, and certainly not radical transformation, because I want to see these things in my lifetime. I am not seeing any signs of these things occurring. Sir, I was in this house, I can't remember how long, many moons. And finally, when I came in this house, I was debating the plight of the people in the bed. I heard the leader of the opposition made mention of it, but I want to give him the assurance. I have my political loyalty, but I would not allow my political loyalty to abandon my loyalty to the people from which I sprung on, or the people who sent me to Parliament on the 4th occasion in my life. I'm going to fight this one. I'm going to fight this one, and it must happen. It must happen, even if it happened on the eve of my departure from planet Earth. It has to happen. I have heard all different types of people who are into showmanship, who come into these corridors and talk. They want to impress upon people they're philosophical, they're orators, and that they're smooth, but they show no interest in human beings. A lot of them leaving here, or rather left here, when the abundance or the accumulation of riches. Prior to coming to Parliament, they never showed any political interest, never discussed any public issue in their lives, not at home or abroad. Post-rejection from these chambers, they never utter a word, even to give you a concept that can contribute to development. What all them did is end up with a lot of concrete erections, not only at home, but abroad. Abroad. They walk around dressed in the best robes because of their elevation. Never had to pay the price for the injurious conduct that society witnessed during their time. And because they were able to hide their acts and make it difficult because of the laws or the administrators of the laws, not unearthing the criminality that occur in administration during their time, they walk free and flaunt themselves around without any care. And small people in this country still remain landless, some without food, some without work, and some still caught up in the mystery of partisan politics, namely saying, I am a DLP. And the leadership and the membership of the parties, some people don't even know these people, never see them yet, can't remember the names. Everybody abandoned their role as a pressure group to ensure that matters of this kind are shaped in order to ensure that it embraced the general interest of the broad masses of this country, the lumpen proletariat in this society itself. All that you keep hearing all the time is that these people don't like work. I hear, I still hear it. The people don't like work. They don't produce. I hear it. And then they create economic models that the first source of sacrifice is demand at the lowest level of the society, the lowest economic level of the society. They cannot create a level of political development or economic development when they run into difficulties in life unless they sacrifice their own. I am not telling you I'm any magician, because probably I had an opportunity to peep into the school, probably through it more in my life than if you probably check your records, you will find that I probably threw it more than I stayed in the schoolroom. I had an opportunity to spend a little time in the Barbados Community College and the University of West Indies, and I was able to stumble across the line. I believe that we need, at this juncture, which is so much of a transformation, this at this time of our lives, not, sorry, I don't even know if they got a word called, I don't know if I could combine these two words, economic masturbation. But I don't believe, sir, that we should just be using what is considered to be our academic talents to look at new models and not understand that we have a commitment, a divine mission, a people's mission to do something at this time in life that will make life difficult for people. I am not going to tell you any lies. 2 days ago, I saw the trauma of a young lady in the heat or in those moments of jubilation, extremely joyful, and just a message, and I see the agony of those things. And I believe that in our economic model, like Arthur Lewis, we have to find an alternative. We have to find an alternative of development. Because I know a lot of people talk about making some little amendments to the legislation and all that kind of things. That is all right. That sounds good. But the legislation must reflect the metrics of the hour. It has to reflect that. So I'm not talking about any legislation that somebody will go up to Canada and the United States of America and somewhere in Australia and say this is Commonwealth precedent, and we're going to take Commonwealth precedent and adjust it and apply it to Caribbean or the peculiarities of a Barbadian situation. Because the vast majority of our people are landless people. And people who others speak about in the most comfortable way without increasing or decreasing the heartbeat as squatters. The other day was looking at the immigration law, imbeciles, all kind of terms. Idiots. I thank the leader of the opposition for that. But, sir, it is very difficult for us to speak with any purity of thought when we start off with a major precedent that we are dealing with inferior beings. It is unfortunate. But all the language, the jargon that you use, as long as the jargon is clouded. Look, when Obama was in office, Obama said, see me, I can't deal with this word called nigger. All the dub artists down here were singing, young black human beings called themselves whopping nigger. People were in the United States of America trying to see if we can purge the mind of the phobia of describing themselves as niggers because they had no knowledge of history. Sir, I know that you always got me, and the rules also provide for that. But sir, I really want to see an emphasis placed on a strand of development that I am not against the development of other people, because that is a right that they must have. They have a right to preserve what is theirs. So I speak with no bitterness, but I speak with a strong knowledge of social history. If I did not, I would not be of the opinion that at least one small unit should exist in this country for the Amerindians. And in other countries where they could not find any, they reconstruct something. These people came here to find lands, 1627. Find lands. They saw living headquarters, but they saw no living people. That's hard to understand. You think the people went to New York for vacation? You think so? Nobody in this country don't want to preserve Frank Walker building, Frank World's building, to the eastern side of Empire Cricket Grounds. And that is of historic value too. Nobody don't want to preserve Arabar House, and they don't even care if Grant Adams live in a house. You know, everybody want George Washington. George Washington come on here and loiter for a little while for respite care. Everybody want George Washington house. Something got to be wrong. Something must be wrong. If development plans and reforms and radical transformations could occur in this country, and nobody wants to preserve the interests of people who look like you that talking in these chambers, something wrong in this country. I went to Scotland and Edinburgh, and they took me on a bus on a street that isn't more than 3 feet wide. The bus stopped, and they tell us, get off and look down there. That is where Adam Smith lived. I went to Ethiopia, and they had the pants and the shirt, the ornaments and the chairs that came back from Italy, the preserves of Haile Selassie. I see that. What is wrong? I came here 1,000 times and said, look at this thing. Nobody that struggled for us, you spend $1 million to replace them things. Because Queen Victoria must be in the halls of this august chambers. If it breaks out tonight, it will get replaced by next week. Somebody will fly it on. And it will cost $2 million. So I want to see during the consultation, when we move across the island, I will listen to the contributions. Minister of Culture, 2 Sundays ago. 2 Sundays or the 2 weeks ago. We traveled to Rock Hall, the first black free village. I spoke to him about Heinzman Hill. I said, we don't even have a marker up there. When I was in Ghana, in Uganda, at the mouth of the River Nile, there is an indicator, a tall pole, that tells you, generally speaks, not Africa, you know, right here. He identified this as the mouth of the Nile. It is the first free village that gave support to the first black man, described then as the first colored man that entered the House of Assembly. You have nothing in the history of Barbados that tells you this is where he lived. This is how he got there. Not so for Jefferson and Washington and all them boys up in the U.S. But so for us. When we're talking about development, you have to apply yourself to these things. We left Rock Hall. And where it took you? We went up to Newton Burying Ground. Some people might feel that we practicing obedience, sir. But we went up to Newton Burying Ground. It is the biggest site in the Caribbean that the fossils of slaves, I don't even know if you could call that interred, because I don't even believe that any type of ceremony occurred. A barbaric attitude would have applied in that time, and it would just dump the bodies down there. They had the coffin and the caskets and those kind of things. All I want to tell you is that you don't have the caskets, buddy. You had nothing like that. When I got up there, I am hearing that the museum is responsible for this place. We are talking about tourism. We want to produce miniatures of the metropolitan world. We have our own rich indigenous history here that is unique, where we can expose tourists because they want to come and see something different. And because of the game players and the gatekeepers in this society, they're making sure that that aspect of development of culture remains secondary to the kind of culture they want to perpetuate. Are we guilty? We are guilty, sir. We can change that. You got Martineau House, Round Reed Street. Even this party is guilty because that is where great minds met at the right time in the 1930s. Some of you don't even know where Marcus Garvey was. And you talk about Marcus Garvey, you chant things about Marcus Garvey, and you talk a lot of empty, superficial rhetoric about development in this country. I believe, sir, that we can do better than that. We can preserve tenantry roads, do it in such a way that people will want to see what life was like in a district with all the traditional formations of the housing units made out of timber, not plywood sheets. We're at a stage now in so-called modern Barbados where a large percentage of our young people in this society has to buy cardboard and now redefine what constitutes a house. And they only know that there's no house when there's a heavy rainfall, and they can see the water soaking through from the exterior into the interior, and then somebody come out on a stretcher with pneumonia. And we turn our backs on that. We had a landless, we had a program at the UDC on the Tenure Freehold Purchasing Act, where families that never know what title deeds look like, families could get land for $2.50 a square foot. But up in the plantation lands, they used to get it for 10 cents a square foot. People only want opportunity, you know. That was put on pause by a modern political party. Nobody was able to enjoy the pleasures, the excitement of ownership of plantation property, the free, simple, absolute in possession.
Okay, legal term, sir. I remember speaking a very good legal term.
Yeah, well, sometimes as a consequence of interacting, sir, with you, I pick up a term or two. But nobody, no ordinary person has seen ownership for the last 10 years. As a result of the Tenure Freehold Purchasing Act, the most genuine, practical, not theoretical, but practical transformation of the lives of our people in this country. Nobody. The people in the rural communities who live on the plantations and died at 42 years and 43 years, and some say at 20, that look as old as Nebuchadnezzar early, because of the pain and the burden of trying to preserve the wealth or being coerced into preserving the wealth of people who don't look like them. Those people were even denied the right to purchase the plantation lands at $10 per square foot. And when the land, 10 cents a square foot, sorry sir. And when those lands, the rejected lands, called RAB lands, were of no great value, we had the mechanism to do what we would like to do with them. But now you look and see who built by the RAB lands of Barbados. Look and see who built by the RAB lands. Look and see who dominated the coastal lands in this country. You want to talk about reform? You want somebody guiding the documentation that misguiding you all the time? Huh? Tell me who live on the coastal lands. Tell me if a man that poverty stricken, that can't pay a light bill and a water bill, and he got a limited number of the equivalent to 4,000 square feet, that could just hold on a little child house. Tell me if somebody tell him I get off $1 million. This man that ain't eat chicken for about 4 weeks. You think the man will refuse that? So the coastal lands gone. The coastal land, you had the plantation lands, and now you're taking up the coastal lands, and then you have a policy that is all embracing to this unfortunate situation where people now have in this country the ask for window to the sea. If you want to go get a bath, you got to ask for a window to the sea. Boy, we're not joking in Barbados, boy. Huh? You can, Mr. Speaker, I'm ain't making sense. I don't want you to ask. Because you're an attorney at law, and you have to live through the circumstances. I, sir, strongly believe that we have some archaic buildings that we need to preserve because that is also a part of history. Stop talking about the Empire Building. Do something about it. Get somebody to come in and do something about it. The Cubans came before and made a total assessment of it. And at that time, I don't know what the situation now, because again, you got to ask other persons, you got to spend more money.
I remember it's 2 more minutes.
Yes, sir. Okay, thanks, sir. You got to reclaim those buildings. There's a mass of ugliness across the landscape. I'm not talking about slave huts and that kind of thing now. I'm not talking about old traditional churches. I'm not talking about preserving the Orisha faith or even the units of Obeah. I'm talking about the legacy of a people who don't even look like us. I'm not raping the lands of Egypt in Cairo, or Cairo in Egypt. We're talking about the necessity for us to reconstruct and revive and give a rebirth to some of the lands, rather than wasting time talking about demolishing everything around you. Nobody seems to be focusing on how we can preserve in preserving within the framework of development. You have an old hospital on Jimmins Lane. You have Baxter's Road. People talking about how good the ventilation. See those flaps that are on the exterior of these windows? Creative thoughts many moons ago. You can close the windows and enjoy the ventilation. Now people got you clustered, catching for your breath. If you got an air conditioner, you get dead in society.
Could you all remember when it, please?
And some people believe that the early thinkers who constructed these units across the country, they have contributed nothing to the development of the genuine civilization of Barbados. Sir, I very much appreciate it. I appreciate the opportunity that you have given me. I believe I've exhausted myself.
That is correct.
I've exhausted myself. But I really believe that I owe you the debt of sincere gratitude for the level of tolerance that you reveal to me and allow me the limited period of time for which I've been able to address the honorable chambers.
Honorable Member for St. James South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to share in this debate pertaining to the planning law reform because I think it is so absolutely critical to the well-being and the advancement of Barbados and building out a new economy. And so it gives me great pleasure to join my colleagues who've shared before me, who've spoken about the plans that we have for reforming how our town planning department works. And I'm really grateful for the opportunity to be a part of an experience that is seeking to build a new Barbados, a Barbados that works for everyone. When the average citizen listens to the term town planning, they often think it has nothing to do with them unless they want to go and build a house. But if one looks at a definition of town planning, you can see that town planning affects every single human being, whether they engage it directly or not. A definition that's given for town planning has been the art of shaping and guiding the physical growth and development through creating buildings and environments to meet various needs: social, economic, cultural, recreational, so that we can provide healthy conditions in which our citizens will live, work, and play. And so what it seeks to do is to create a well-balanced social and economic development plan for the country. It seeks to improve the quality of life of citizens. It seeks to be responsible for the administration of our limited resources, for our environmental protection, and most importantly, for the rational use of our land. And this is important to citizens because, as I said, whether you engage the town planning department or not, every time they make a decision, it has an impact on your life. If they make a decision and allow for the construction of a plant that is just above where you live, and it has pollutants, air pollutants or water pollutants, it's going to affect you. If you allow someone to build in a way that affects the flow of water and flooding then comes into your environment, this too affects you. If a developer is allowed to float laws, whether it is as simple, Mr. Speaker, as people not sinking wells to the correct depth that they've been asked to sink them to, it creates a problem. I have that problem in Crystal Heights, where the wells were not sunk low enough, and every time you get flooding, you get heavy rainfall, there's flooding throughout. So good town planning and obedience to town planning laws and requirements is absolutely vital for all citizens to be able to enjoy the space that is called Barbados. Well, what has been the history of planning in Barbados? Barbados was a plantation economy. And when you look at the layout of Barbados, you can see the impact of that particular economic model on the way in which we've laid out our space. And this is seen very sharply, for example, in our Bridgetown area, where if you look at the Pier Head, if you look at Hink Street, because we were a plantation economy, seeking to move sugar down to the port, to the harbor, to get them onto ships, because we were bringing in all of our goods to feed and have equipment for our businesses and furniture for our homes, all the bond warehouses were located just outside of this building. And those are what we see today. That today, a lot of prime physical land space that could actually earn more for Barbados were used differently is still inhabited by buildings shaped on a physical development plan based on the plantation model. And therefore, if Barbados is to go forward, another example of that is the fact that we have our fuel facilities, for example, down at Holborn, or where we had Mobile up by the Aquatic Gap, where they locate their tanks as close as possible to the sea. But this is prime real estate land that Barbados definitely needs to be able to use. So now that Barbados is shifting to a services economy, it is absolutely vital that we use our land resources differently. And in order for us to do that, we must have a town planning department that is fit for purpose. We must have a town planning department that operates efficiently. We must have a town planning department that is able to give life to the program, the vision, the strategy that we have laid out for our own economic development. It means that Barbados must reimagine the space and how we are going to use it to create economic opportunities for this generation and the one that is to come. And that can only happen if our town planning department is supported by good legislation. only if it has good leadership, only if it is outfitted with all the necessary tools that it can carry out the function and purpose. And therefore, what lies before Barbados is an opportunity now to put in place those reforms that will allow us to eliminate the mistakes from the past and to prevent future misuse of this department so that it can do its job. Absolutely essential to us at this point in time, Mr. Speaker, is our need to be able to attract investment. But Barbados must carefully select that investment which will give us the highest returns, provide us with the foreign exchange earnings, provide our young people with the jobs that they've been trained for, that they've gone to the university to equip themselves for. Our young people coming out from our secondary schools, we've got to attract that particular investment. And what is the investment that Barbados should be going after? Well, Barbados has a competitive advantage in services, but not just any service. It has to be high-end services. That's the strategy that we have to pursue if we're going to shape a Barbados that will produce the necessary gross domestic product that will allow Barbadians to live their best life. And this means that we have to have a land use policy that allows us to do a number of things. Our land use policy must allow for proper housing. It must allow for food security, so we have to have the agriculture. We have to have places for work, so we have to be able to build buildings, etc., offices, etc. And we also have to have space for leisure. This is very important. But we only have 166 square miles to play with. And because it's only 166 square miles, it has to be used efficiently. So I said to myself, what are some of the other places that have had similar challenges, and how have they addressed it? And an example came to mind. And I chose this one because everybody knows it. And that is the city of Las Vegas. When you say Las Vegas, everybody knows where it is. Everybody knows what it does. Now, Las Vegas made its name with gambling. I am not suggesting that Barbados do that. But rather, there are some similarities. Las Vegas is about 4 times the size of Barbados. It's 600 square miles. It has a population of 648,000 people. But they have been able to pursue a high-end services strategy that has worked through proper town planning, a vision, making the investment, and all the citizens working together on that plan to make it work. And so the end result is that in Las Vegas, their gross domestic product is $93 billion. And their per capita income is $44,810 US. And how did they do it? Yes, it's true they started with gambling, but they soon realized they had to broaden their services. So they went to entertainment, they went to conventions. Las Vegas is now known for convention centers and convention experiences. Shopping has also been a prime mover for the Las Vegas economy. And so what they did was they broadened into high-end services. But what helped to make it work was the spirit of the people. And that is what is going to make the difference for Barbados. It was the leadership that the Las Vegas team had, the urban planning that they pursued, and the spirit of the people to be able to work that plan. So one of the things that's important for us to communicate to our Barbadian citizens is this: that the success of Barbados going forward does not solely depend on government. That good urban planning will not translate into economic growth solely because of the actions of the government. Rather, while the government creates the policy framework, while it sets in place the reforms and the changes as we're seeking to do by putting out our green paper, that we can discuss what changes we need to make, while government can do that, Government then has to provide the incentives to broaden the participation of people. But what is needed is leadership at the community level, leadership at the political level. You need access to finance. Because if we are going to make our economic policy work, then we have to make sure that citizens are not left behind. And that is why it's important for them to engage in this town planning process as we are discussing it here in the Parliament. What are the things that will take Barbados forward? We have tourism, but it's not just sand and sea. We want to look at our culture, we want to look at our heritage and how we can make the best use of our physical and cultural assets to create a tourism experience that will bring people from all over the world. We want to be able, Mr. Speaker, to pursue financial services, to pursue culture, to pursue as well retail, to make Barbados a place for shopping, a mecca in the Caribbean. And so the Barbados Labour Party in its manifesto set out a plan. And this plan will be buttressed by an effective town planning department to help us make it a living reality. And what is part of that plan? One of the things that have grabbed my imagination in the manifesto is Bridgetown as a smart city. That our intention is to take our capital city and turn it into a space that offers high-tech services, where you can get free Wi-Fi, where the city will be humming, because we want to be able to provide in the city accommodation, to be able to attract the young yuppies, the young professionals, to be living in the city again. We want to be able to have vending in the city. We don't want to eliminate it. We want vending to be a part of the landscape. And we want to attract the investment and the businesses that will bring life again to Bridgetown. And by having people living in this space, by having people shopping in this space, working in this space, we want Bridgetown to be busy day and night. And we want to make it beautiful. But for that to happen, Mr. Speaker, all of us have to work together to make it happen. And what does that require? Town planning will look at our spaces and see where are the areas we want to cordon off for specific types of activity that will give life to this plan. And therefore, the urban planning is important. But we also need to have a clean environment. So it means that we have to get our citizens to understand that littering must stop, that sanitation services must work well. We also have to have convenience in this space, transport. You must be able to get around the city with ease, move from one place to the other, so that you can enjoy the wide range of services that are available. And this will allow our entrepreneurs to locate themselves any part of the city and be able to get business coming. But we've got to plan, do the urban planning of Bridgetown and convert it from the plantation economy model and now convert it into a services model city. And this will present many opportunities for St. James South, Mr. Speaker. I have a lot of wonderful talent in St. James South. When it comes to entertainment, I have people who are at the top of their game, but they need the commercial opportunities in which to be able to showcase this talent. We have wonderful chefs, but I want them to do more than work at a hotel. I want some of them to be able to own their own restaurants. A well-planned, revived, renewed, refreshed Bridgetown would provide the opportunity for the young people in St. James South to be a part of what is up and happening in our country. Good urban planning is where it will start. This is why, Mr. Speaker, what we are discussing this evening requires that everybody be involved to make sure that what we finally present in the white paper as policy and what we bring as legislation will give us the opportunity to achieve the result which we've said we want to do. Now, any part of the world, if you want to create good economic development using your town planning skills as your tool, it requires that your town planning process must be sanitized of corruption and it must be sanitized of inefficiency. And our vision for our renewed space means that we have to put in place those things that will ensure that our town planning process is completely sanitized of that corruption and inefficiency. We need to have transparent decisions. And earlier this morning, you heard the Honourable Member for St. Michael's South Central speak about the need for a regulatory board that would review and look over and be part of the decision-making process so that the decisions are not made in the dark, so that decisions are not made based on subjectivity, but rather that they will have input on the best minds as to whether or not this particular investment, whether this particular action will meet the Barbados plan to make Barbados work again for everyone. The other thing that I loved about what I saw in the document was the fact that we needed to have timelines. And for discussion is the notion that a simple plan should take no more than 8 weeks. A complex plan, 13 weeks, and a plan that requires an environmental impact assessment, 16 weeks. I cannot tell you how welcome that is to me, Mr. Speaker, because I myself have gone through the experience of seeking to help a family take a piece of land and turn it into a development so that the 14 members of this family, young and old, could benefit from the property which was left to them by their grandfather. And Mr. Speaker, it took 2 years. 2 years to get planning approval. Calling, checking, asking, prodding. It was the most frustrating experience, Mr. Speaker, one could have. And therefore, I could relate to what was shared here in the chamber, that there is no investor who's going to sit down and wait 442 days for no approval of any planning permission. They are gone.
That's right.
They've found another country. They've found another location. And every time that happens, Barbadians lose. Every time that happens, jobs that should have been created for our young people are not there. Investment that would come in and buy goods and services and give a stimulant to the existing Barbadian businesses here. None of that is achieved. Our foreign exchange does not grow. Our economy does not grow. Every time we take too long to process a document, as simple as that may sound. And that is why it is absolutely essential that we have this reform of our town planning process. And therefore, I salute it heartily, heartily, Mr. Speaker. Then there's the enforcement. The enforcement also must not be subjective. There must be certainty. You cannot have one law for the Medes and a different one for the Persians. You can't have two Barbadoses. You cannot come in Haynesville and knock down a whole set of illegal structures, but then when a big up puts a structure down on Spring Garden or puts a structure up on the highway, that is not removed, and that the past administration could rush in at the last minute before an election to give planning permission so that it cannot be moved. It's wrong. Must not happen. There cannot be two Barbadoses, Mr. Speaker. We must have a law that presents certainty for everyone. For everyone. It is not only enforcement. What I like was the fact that performance targets are going to be set. My background is in management consulting, in human development, working with companies, working with individuals, where you try to help them to understand the absolute importance of meeting performance targets so that the enterprise or the organization can succeed. And in this case, the enterprise that we are seeking to bring success to is to the nation of Barbados, and therefore it matters to every citizen. Therefore, performance targets are going to be important. If we are going to transform how we behave in our town planning, it must be transparent, it must be efficient. To transform our town planning department and its actions, Mr. Speaker, is something that is such a priority. If people were to look at all the myriads of things that we needed to do right now, and believe me, Mr. Speaker, the Barbados Labour Party government has been doing a myriad of things all at the same time. Walking, chewing gum at the same time, whistling and doing everything at the same time. But if you ask the average citizen if town planning should have been prioritized, they would tell you no, because they would not understand that nothing can move forward in terms of investment until we get the town planning process right. So what we must do as a nation, we must honor the professionals who work in that department, who want to do a good job, who want to do an honest job. We have to honor them by making sure they have the resources with which to work. We have to honor them by giving them the training that they need. We need to honor them by providing the change management, because it's not easy switching from one way of working to another way of working. Snap, snap. Doesn't work like that. You have to give people the support and the training to get the job done. And most importantly, we have to give them leadership, and we have to give them protection from the pressures that will come to bear to affect them in doing their work properly and honestly. And why must we do that? Mr. Speaker, we owe it to the 1,500 workers that are going to be released at the end of the month. Those people right now who are stressing about losing their job, wondering about the future, wondering how they're going to make ends meet. That if we take the time, if we work to make sure that we fast-track the changes in our physical development program and make sure that we have a town planning department that works quickly, we will be able to attract the investment that will give those 1,500 people a chance to be retrained and get good-paying jobs that they can provide for their families, they can build a future, and they can contribute to the nation, and when they put their heads down at night, that they can sleep well. We owe it to the 4,000 workers who were laid off by the Democratic Labour Party, laid off summarily, sent home with no check in their hand, sent home with no training, sent home with no opportunities to get another job, done completely differently from how the Barbados Labour Party has addressed this very painful issue. And I can tell you, there is no member of this party, from the Prime Minister back down, who does not feel the pain and hear the cries of their constituents who will find themselves without that job, or the ones who were summarily dismissed by the Democratic Labour Party, who are still hunting jobs years later, thrown out of their homes because they can't pay the rent, scorching, trying this, trying that to be able to keep food on the table. We owe it to them to get this town planning process right and get it done quickly so that we can get to the business of attracting the investment which is lining up outside to make sure that we're able to create jobs for our people. It is also for the 4,000 young people that we release every year from our school system. UE is having a graduation tomorrow. At least 2,800 young people are going to be coming out of that system looking for work. believing in what we told them, that if they went to school, if they stayed out of trouble, if they get a degree, they will get a good paying job and they could live a good life. We told them that. We owe it to them to change this town planning process. Get it on the road so that investments can come to this country, that those young people can believe in a Barbados in which they can dream and live and have the future that they're looking for, plan to get married and have babies, start families, start businesses. We owe it to them. And Mr. Speaker, we owe it to the thousands who lost jobs in the private sector. Everybody hears when 1,500 people are laid off in the civil service. Everybody heard when 4,000 people were laid off by the Dems. But nobody hears when the small shops close and people go home in 2s and 3s. When vendors disappear from Swan Street. When you walk down Broad Street and you go on Swan Street and you see the stores closed, when you go over by the bus station, the bus stand, and see the little booths empty, the for rents and for sale signs, testimony to the fact that a business has closed and that people have gone home. Thousands of them have gone home and no one has raised a voice, cried on their behalf, because they went in 2s and 3s and were invisible. It is for them that we are doing this. And I want to say to them, I want to say to Barbadians out there, right now times are tough, but that is okay. It is what we have to do to get to where we need to get to. We have got to stop the bleeding. This is why this was necessary. But the next step is even more important. We have got to build the economy and generate those jobs. And the faster we get that done, the sooner we can get to a place where our Prime Minister can come and announce the necessary ease that is needed in this economy.
The honourable member has 2 more minutes.
So, Mr. Speaker, I am very much obliged to you for the time that you've given me. And I want to say, I am thoroughly excited by this work which we are doing. I am excited by the plans that we have coming up in the future for Barbadians. If we do what we are supposed to do and do it diligently, if every civil servant puts his or her hand to the plow and work even harder, if every private sector person gets up on a morning and gets to work with the spirit and attitude that they must push that business forward more, earn an extra dollar, if every citizen gets up on mornings and decides what they are going to do in their community to keep it clean, to take care of their families, to help with those who are in need, if we can get everyone working together on this plan, Mr. Speaker, we will be able to bequeath to the generations of Barbadians which are to come a Barbados that works, a Barbados that is prosperous, a Barbados that is inclusive, and a Barbados that has a future and a destiny for every single one of its citizens. And I am proud to have the opportunity to work to help make that a reality and to be a part of the new Barbados that we are building in this year of 2018, so that we can lift our heads again in this region as a proud, prosperous country with a future. I'm obliged to you, Mr. Speaker.
Speaker, I beg that consideration of this resolution be postponed.
Question is that consideration of this resolution be postponed. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. This resolution is so postponed.
Mr. Speaker, that brings us to the end of government business for today. I beg to move that this sitting be now adjourned until Tuesday, the 23rd of October, 2018, at 10 a.m.
Question is that this honorable chamber be adjourned until Tuesday, the 23rd of October, at 10 a.m. in the forenoon. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. This honorable chamber is postponed until Tuesday, the 23rd of October, at 10 a.m. in the forenoon.